Despite that, we have so many of you here, and I think that says more about Bradley and his talk than anything else. So Bradley and I used to work together a long time ago, and we haven't seen each other since, but he still very graciously agreed to come down and spend the evening with us, and we are really grateful and looking forward to this talk. I was going to give you a bit more of an introduction around Bradley, but he has incorporated that into his talk, so we'll let him introduce himself as part of the talk. We'll have the talk go for about a half hour. We'll have Q&A after that, and we'll end at about 8:30. We have the space till 9 o'clock, so we're still open for networking and any follow-up questions you might have for Bradley after that. So without further ado, Bradley, over to you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you guys for coming. All right, first things first. It's tied 61-61. We got a big screen TV. We got beer. Are you guys thinking what I'm thinking? I'll go fast. Hopefully we'll catch the end of the game together if you don't have any questions. Hint, hint. Okay, all right. So this is a talk about AI and product management through the lens of my own personal experience. This is not a BuzzFeed listicle, you know, here's 9 weird tricks to put AI in your product. If that's what you're looking for, you can go watch the game. But I do hope this is useful, and I think the Q&A will be exciting too. So this is really a story in 3 chapters with a preface and a conclusion in there. And a lot of this revolves around a specific aspect of AI, which is computer vision. And computer vision is a field that I accidentally stumbled into and has sort of kept my interest and my career propelled along for more than 20 years. And I'm going to walk you through my own experience and sort of a narrative around how computer vision has changed and the industry's approach, as well as my own, has changed over the years. So, before we get to that, we're going to talk a little bit about a setup here, the preface. I know we have at least 1 Michigan alum in the audience. 2, okay. There's always a few, 3, 4, 5. Okay, you can fake it. We're not going to look for diplomas. But this is a picture of my mentor, Ramesh Jain, back at the University of Michigan when I arrived way back 25 years ago. Ramesh was a luminary in the field of computer vision, and he actually launched the University of Michigan Artificial Intelligence Laboratory way before AI was a thing. There were a few labs around the country, you know, MIT and Stanford did a lot of the early pioneering work, but he brought it to Michigan first. And this is the vehicle that I worked on when I was an undergraduate. I was writing low-level device drivers and things like that. This is autonomous vehicle navigation, and you can see it doesn't look like a Tesla at all. And the goal was not to put this thing on the road. The goal was to put this thing there in 3 Mile Island. The idea was when a nuclear reactor melted down, it wasn't safe for a human to go in there and clean it up, and we actually had to send robots in there to do the dirty work of sort of maintenance in radioactive environments. And so the Department of Energy, Oak Ridge National Labs, funded this research many, many years ago, and some of the techniques you'll see today. Another thing I got to do at the University of Michigan was work with this guy, and I found the most imposing old black and white photos I could find so that this really sort of dates the period here. That guy is Emmett Leith. He is considered one of the inventors of holography, and he won the National Medal of Science, which is a big prestigious honor. This is an example of an optics table, and what I got to do back then as an undergraduate, again, this is sort of, you know, cheap labor. I got to go in there and write the microcode for a liquid nitrogen cooled CCD camera that could capture individual photons and do really precise measurement. And I also got to take a class in holography while I was at the University of Michigan, and all of these things together accidentally put me on a path towards imaging, graphics, and computer vision. And that's me. I haven't changed a bit, right? And you know, this was, back in the 80s, a long time ago, it was really hard to take a picture. You know, cameras weren't in everyone's pocket. And this lab actually had the first camera that I had ever seen, and it was not a commercial product. It was a very scientific product, and it took low-res photos, and it only took black and white photos. But one thing I quickly learned to do was to color them. So you could apply these color maps to them. They were sort of 256-bit images, but they had color maps that you could manipulate. So we played around with that and had a lot of fun down there in the basement of the lab, taking pictures and manipulating them, and really fell in love with imaging. I wasn't the only one. Another student, actually two students, Tom and John Knoll, who are also Michigan alum, created a little program called Photoshop, which they run down the street from here now. And their mentor, who is my mentor, Ramesh Jain, remembers trying to talk them out of dropping out of the PhD program. He said, everybody goes through this. You're throwing your career away. Don't leave. You know, you'll get through this. And they said, no, we're leaving. And it was obviously the best decision they ever made. So after graduating from the University of Michigan, and I should share, I was a terrible student. I was a good learner. I took a lot of classes way outside of my required classes. So I took all of the necessary computer science and electrical engineering classes, but I also took music and holography and cognitive science and history of religion and, you know, classics, which it took me 6 years to graduate, but I really enjoyed it and really enjoyed being at a school that offered that much diversity, and it really informed the next steps in my career. I ended up at the MIT Media Lab, and this is in the early days of the Media Lab. Back in '89 is when I arrived. The lab had only launched a few years before. And it was really about this sort of interdisciplinary study. Instead of just studying computer science and hardcore algorithms and systems, they brought in artists like Yo-Yo Ma, and they brought in visual artists and drama and graphic design and things like that, which in those days was really cutting edge and breakthrough. And all the other labs at MIT sort of looked askance and sort of said, what is this place? It's not serious. But I think in the due course of time, it's proven that this sort of convergence of bringing other disciplines together with AI and software is really where the interesting part of the problem is. This is my advisor at MIT, Sandy Pentland, who at one point was a computer vision expert. He's actually reinvented himself multiple times over. He is also a wearable computers pioneer. He is a blockchain pioneer. He's an amazing Renaissance man, and I'm hugely grateful to have studied under him and learned a ton. Now, the origins of computer vision at MIT are legendary, and I actually, in pulling these pictures, discovered that this story has been debunked. So this may or may not be true, but it's still a good story. And the story is that Marvin Minsky assigned the problem of computer vision to one of his grad students, Gerald Sussman, over the summer. He said, why don't you hook a camera up to a computer and make it see? Tell me how that works out at the end of August. And one of two things happened, is even Marvin Minsky, one of the great pioneers of AI, grossly underestimated how hard computer vision was, which is a possibility, or he was an excellent manager. And one of the best techniques for getting people to do the impossible is to not mention that it's impossible. You just sort of say, have that in by Friday, and, you know, sometimes it happens, you know. So we'll never know exactly what came down there, but MIT was very, very early in computer vision, and actually early in AI as well. Some really pioneering work there. As is typical of MIT and also Google, there were 9 different labs, each competing against each other there. Each one thought that they were, do we have any MIT grads here too? Yeah, I see some nods and yes. So you guys know that that's true. This research was happening all over the campus. The particular part of computer graphics and AI that I had stumbled into under Sandy was really sort of at the intersection of computer graphics, think Pixar and, you know, CGI, and computer vision. And Sandy's insight at the time was that a lot of the world could be modeled using these things called superquadrics. And superquadrics you can think of as a mathematical expression that sort of goes between a cube or a sphere, depending on a coefficient. And then, mathematical deformations on top of that superquadric, like pinching, rotating, twisting, those kinds of deformations that you see here, tapering. And then, based on combining these, you could actually model different objects. And obviously you could put them together like clay, like this one here. Excuse me one second while I reattach. Okay. And then what we did was sort of live at this intersection of graphics and vision. So we would take 2D projections of the world, try to infer what were the 3D models behind them, and then we started to model the physical environment. So we added things like friction and gravity and deformation. So a lot of the thesis work was really around modeling things like a heart, which is a non-rigid object. So it's one thing to model a cube, it's another to model something that deforms over time. And we used a lot of techniques from civil engineering, finite element analysis, and sort of the way that earthquake-shaped buildings is not different than the way that objects deform. So incredible stuff, lots of fun. And then I sort of mentioned that I was a poor student already. There came a point, I got my master's from the Media Lab, started the PhD program, and there comes a point in every PhD journey when almost anything looks better than picking a thesis topic, right? You're like, this compiler sucks, I have to rewrite it from scratch, or whatever. And right at that moment of vulnerability, my friend Ramesh from the University of Michigan called me and said, would you like to start a company? And I said, absolutely, I'm in. And so I dropped out of the PhD program at MIT. They told me if things didn't work out, I had 5 years to go back. They worked out, so I never went back and never finished, so I'm a dropout. And Ramesh and I formed a company called Virage, which is chapter 1. Basically, we dropped out of school to build a company that was focused on visual information retrieval. And actually, the reason we picked the name Virage was, the age of visual information retrieval. We thought that age was upon us. And we thought it sounded French. And it was cool. We had no marketing department. So we went through a couple logos, we founded a company, and a more clueless bunch of academics have never founded a company. I know now you can open a YouTube video, you can probably open an Instagram video and get a lesson on how to found a company, raise VC money, and become a billionaire. But we didn't have that back then. In fact, we didn't know how to spell VC. We drove from Cambridge, Massachusetts to California, and we landed in San Diego. We thought we were in Silicon Valley. And it actually took about 14 months of being down there before we realized we had missed. It's only like 2 degrees, but we had missed, and the whole company caravanned up, and we ended up in San Mateo, which was better. But what we were doing, the age of visual information retrieval, we basically took the research we had been doing in academia, brought it and commercialized it, and we basically had an algorithm that said, given a candidate image, like this picture of a rose, we could search a database of tens of thousands, this was a big number then, of other images and find me other images that look like that. So it was visual similarity was what we were doing. And if you squint, and these are low-res images, you can't really see them. We have a toucan in there, we have a dog in there, we also have some flowers, but from the back row, we were doing a great job. Basically, these are green things with pink splotches, right? And that was the state of computer vision and AI at the time, is sort of, we were able to sort of find things that look like other things. This is an example, trying to explain that this was sort of the state of the art of the technology, that a puppy dog on grass looked like a golf ball on the putting green. And that was as well as we could do, because the primitives we were dealing with were things like color, shape, texture, and that was as good as we could do in those days. Now, actually, in trying to find assets to show you guys like this image, I did some Googling, and it was very sad that a lot of the company's legacy is not up on the web and is sort of lost. I actually didn't go digging deep into the Wayback Machine, the Internet Archive, but Google has lost it. But I thought that this particular query was telling because it came up with one image from our software and 17 papers we had written, you know. So we really were so naive that we just kept writing papers and thought that, you know, someday someone will bump into a customer somewhere, you know. But eventually the company managed to build this. And we shifted from images to video. And this was the Virage video logger. And the idea of the Virage video logger was way ahead of its time. More on that later. But the idea was that video was this giant opaque asset, this bucket of bits that might be megabytes. That was a lot in those days. And the problem with it was opaque. You couldn't index it. You couldn't reach inside it. And so what we did is we took this video and we indexed it using high tech, using AI. We did speech recognition, optical character recognition, speaker identification. We did scene segmentation. We did look at the images and the keyframes in there. We did closed caption extraction. We did all of the things you see down here are different dimensions and modes of that multimodal indexing that we did. And then it would allow you to do things in an archive of video, like find me the moment in the video where Bill Clinton talks about foreign tax implications of the new financial policy. And you could get a hit right to that point. And so we eventually managed to get this product to our customers who were news organizations, sort of folks like CNN and, you know, ABC News. And I spent many long nights down in the bowels of New York City, down in the news archives of these major organizations, and Atlanta. The problem is sort of identified here. We built this in 2000, started the company in 95, built this in 2000. It wasn't 5 years, it was 5 years later that YouTube launched. You couldn't actually click and play a video, you know, sort of around the time we did this. And so a lot of what I learned as co-founder and CTO of that company was sort of managing down, like, they don't need rocket science, they don't need airplanes, they can barely fly a kite, let's build them a paper airplane, you know? And sort of like helping them encode video and just get around the management of uploading that to a content distribution network, that became our business. And so it was actually a really informative process, sort of. I kept lowering my own expectations about what the company was and what the product needed to be until finally, after years, I met a customer and actually met a customer need and actually fulfilled that need and sold a product. And that felt great. It actually felt better than publishing a peer-reviewed paper or speaking at a conference or something like that. So I really caught the bug and learned the hard lessons of sort of delivering what the customer needs, not what you'd like to work on or what is academics are stroking or what's cutting edge. So the conclusions for Virage, we actually had hyper-competent management and managed to a good outcome. We actually took the company public, grew it to tens of millions of annual revenue. It's NASDAQ, not NASDAQ. The upshot is tons of great lessons that I've carried with me through my career. But the technology didn't work ever in the way that people expected it to. People wanted semantic query so that I could go in and say, find me this, where this was a noun. And they weren't saying, find me objects that look like a white splotch with a green background. Maybe obvious in retrospect, but that was the state of the art of the technology at the time. Okay, so after we went public, the company was acquired as a public company, and I found myself looking for my first job. This was, I dropped out of school, started a company, and then actually had to get a resume together and find a job. And the job I found was at Yahoo. And this was in 2003. I had started looking in 2004 when I joined. Randir, was there any ex-Yahoos in the audience? There's always some, yeah, lots. Hi, Tom. So back in those days, I went to Yahoo thinking it would be a very valuable experience for me to sort of be at a big company, to learn how a big company works, and take those lessons with me. But I didn't expect to stay there, and so I had a little bit of a devil-may-care attitude, that I wasn't really climbing the corporate ladder and was just there to have fun, learn, and do what I thought was right. And the first thing I thought was right, just months after I had got there, was I bumped into this small Canadian company of less than 10 people at the time called Flickr. And Flickr blew my mind, because what Flickr was able to do, and I've got some example queries here, is provide the answer to the problem I had been working on for 10 years up to that point, really computer vision. You could type in sunset and get 5 million results, or dog, and get all these pictures of dog. And one's with the green background, but one's with the white background. You know, it was semantic search. It was exactly what we had hoped for. And you could even type in things like surreal. That's not a noun, it's a category, it's a concept. And you'd get surreal images. So how are they doing this? Delicious. They were doing it with tags, you know, and these tags, the brilliance that Flickr had, and they were among the first, although actually Joshua Schachter from the product called Delicious actually also claims some credit for this. The way that tagging worked is you take an image like this, and you popped up a little dialog box, and with a few painless keystrokes, I could enter a tag in there. It was like effortless and easy. And the really cool social contract around that was I didn't have to tag my own photos. So long as permissions were appropriate, the world would tag my photos for me. And it's just like Wikipedia. There are some wingnuts who, instead of watching the game or going to a great talk like this, they sit at home and tag other people's photos. And that's what they would do. And they would sit there, and it's, you know, it doesn't take much effort. It's sort of like holding the door open for someone, right? It's just a courtesy. It makes the corpus useful. It creates the commons. So there are reasons that they do this, sort of for the social good. But, you know, tags like cool, lizard, iguana are magically applied there. And then the kind of search that you saw works. And so basically when I learned what Flickr did and how they were doing it, this tiny bit of social engineering, I wanted to go home and rip up the 2 diplomas that I did have and basically say, I've been wasting my time. The right way to solve this problem is not through a bunch of algorithms. All you had to do was ask people, and people are generous, and they will go in and they will tag this stuff. And for what happened next, there's a lot of parts of the story I'm skipping. It became apparent to me many, many years ago that the future at Yahoo was not bright. And I left and went to Google about 11 years ago. And had a chance to run many products at Google. I've been the head of product for Gmail, Google Docs, Google Drive, Hangouts, Blogger, Reader, Orchid, Picasa, Google+, Contacts, but the product I am most proud of, Google News, throw that in there, but the product I'm most proud of was the last one that I worked on, which is Google Photos. And that's because it's sort of the cherry on top and the sort of complement back to computer vision of what I had worked on earlier in my career. And the experiment from a product standpoint was not how do we jam some AI into our product. That was not the thinking behind Google Photos. It was really an exploration of what would a modern mobile photos product be. And I think mobile is key there. And I'll talk more about that. A lot of the paradigm is really Gmail for my photos. And so Gmail has a certain use paradigm. A lot of you are not old enough to remember what email was like before Gmail, and I'll cover that as well. A lot of the properties that were around Gmail was enabled by unlimited storage. And we wanted to ask ourselves, could we do the same thing for photos that we had done for emails? This second vacation paradox, what I'm referring to there is you go on Safari, you take 10,000 pictures, and you come home, and now you need a second vacation to go through the pictures you took on your first vacation. Except the problem is you don't get one. You go back to work on Monday, and then they sit there and rot on disk, and you never get a chance to sort of go back and appreciate them and make them useful. We're actually in a situation whereas 30 years ago, it was hard to take a photo. It's almost too easy now. And now we end up with such an abundance of photos that it's more than any possible human can manage or digest. Part of the insight, and this was tough, was that the best camera is the one that you have with you. And this was particularly hard because I had personally invested in $10,000 worth of kit. And Picasa, which was the previous generation of Google photo product, was geared toward those folks like me and my bosses who had invested in $100,000 worth of kit. And so we broke a lot of hearts around Google when we basically said, we're thinking about a different customer. We're thinking about the billion people that carry around a phone in their pocket, and not the few of us who have invested tons of energy buying lenses and high-end cameras and SLRs and things like that. And it changed the way that we thought about the product. The product still works for these folks, but it is not the target demographic. It's not optimized for that particular workflow. And another insight, I talked before about unlimited storage. And it used to be, again, many of you are too young to remember this, but you would go through your email every day, and you would drag every email into a folder, and at the end of the day, you would have no more emails, and you would close the lid of your laptop and come back in the morning when there would be 6 new ones. That's not how it works now. Now we are getting 6 emails an hour, and it's an endless, incessant flood. And the way that Gmail works is more of a pile metaphor, where just throw them on the stack, and you'll get to them when you get to them. If not, they'll pop back up. We've done a lot of clever things lately with Gmail, things like priority inbox, to make sure that the important emails are flagged, classified, and available to you. But these days are over. It was hopeless to have a workflow that depended on me sort of carefully curating everything I received. We needed to lean into automation to deal with the volume of email. And the question we asked about photos is, could we do something similar to deal with the onslaught of photos that was coming toward us? And the happy answer is yes. So here's an example I typed in. These are all real across my own corpus. So I typed in food, and I get all kinds of food. These are things that don't look the same. Some of these up here are bowls, but some of these are shish kebab and other kinds of food, flowers. It does concept search, just like I showed you with Surreal on Flickr. I can say peaceful, and we'll get peaceful images. I can do very deep semantic search. I could actually say Rashi's my dog, Rashi on beach last Christmas, and we do the natural language processing to understand what a phrase like last Christmas means, or Rashi with Irene, my wife. In terms of making sure that these don't rot on disk, we do a lot of work with what we call the assistant to resurface these. So whether it's a Father's Day movie or bundling photos together that are from the same time and place into an album that's ready to share. We also do suggested sharing, so we recognize the people in the album and make it easy for you to share those with them. Rediscover this day, sort of pulling things back from the archive. We don't want these photos to just rot on disk or wait for you to peck something in the search box. We want to delight you with these sort of emergent opportunities as they arise, and the system is working on your behalf. That's why we call it an assistant, someone behind the scenes. And it's doing all kinds of things. It can also straighten photos or colorize photos. So it's sort of like got your back in the sense that it's doing all the work that, if you had a personal assistant to comb over your photos and sort of maximize utility, that's what we aspire to with the assistant. So the conclusion there, sort of the principles that, I'm just going to check the score. Still tied. It's 83-83. Q4. So started out with machine-centric approaches, really getting down into the pixels and doing our best to create heuristics and algorithms that could, build a dog detector. Didn't make much progress. Veered way over to these human-centric approaches, social engineering, tagging, getting people to volunteer their labor and do the work so that the commons became useful. And really where we ended up was right in the middle. And that's really the promise of AI. We need data. We need ground truth. We need the magic of the solution. So what magically started making these things work? It wasn't one thing. There was a sort of confluence of circumstance that led to really what felt like in the last 3-4 years accelerating breakthroughs, particularly in AI, but particularly in computer vision. Some are techniques and algorithms, deep learning, convolutional neural nets. There have been breakthroughs in the last few years around how we represent the data and how we crunch the numbers that have led to breakthroughs. A lot of this is also solving the right problem, and I'll talk about that in a moment, but there are things that AI can do, and there are many things that we wish it could do, and sort of understanding how to find those opportunities is critical. More computing power, that's a huge part of it, and more data. And increasingly, the data sets that you would aspire to are widely available, and so it's an exciting moment as things are accelerating in AI. So when I talk about finding the right problems, you know, pacemakers versus Fitbits. You know, pacemakers require a certain level of reliability or else bad things happen to people. And it's really important you find problems that are soluble and that the AI is up to the task. To be clear, Google Photos fails frequently. I can do all kinds of queries, which I'd be embarrassed to show you. You know, we classify things wrong. We actually create that virtuous feedback loop, so when we do make a mistake, we learn from that mistake, and people can correct those mistaggings, and the system gets smarter over time. But it's very, very important to pick your problem and understand the limits of the AI that you're providing. Another thing that we find is that data collection should be effortless and part of the natural workflow, not something you depend on Mechanical Turk or pay people to enter the data. The best systems, I think of my Tesla, where I put it into auto steer mode, and every time I tug on the steering wheel, that's a signal back to headquarters that it got it wrong, and I had to sort of take over control. And I'm volunteering that not because I'm trying to make Tesla better. I'm doing that for the simple reason of I don't want to die yet. So that's sort of the magical opportunities you're looking for when people are effortlessly volunteering this data that is making the system smarter and smarter. There are obviously big issues in AI with bias and ethics. Garbage in, garbage out. If you feed it a bunch of biased data and data that is either deliberately or more often unconsciously or unintentionally biased, the system will learn those biases. One thing that is interesting and an opportunity, it can also tease out bias. So we can actually use AI to demonstrate people's bias as well as making the mistake of inheriting that bias. And I think there's promising work there that I've seen. And then, of course, filter bubbles. There's all kinds of opportunity for data to sort of feed into itself into sort of dead-end scenarios. So these are sort of the ethical and design considerations that people working in AI today have to struggle with. There are exciting new frontiers. We're working on these at Google, but also in the industry. Things like medicine, of course, diagnostic retinopathy, predicting heart attacks and strokes, finding breast cancer and tumors. In the case here, I would say these become generally assistants for doctors. They're not, prescribing anything, but they can provide triage. If a doctor or an analyst or a radiologist has 10,000 images they have to look at, a system can rank order them and say, these are the ones we deem most concerning. Spend more attention on these. These are the ones that warrant human analysis. So for a lot of these things, back to pacemaker versus Fitbit, we don't want to overstate the achievements, but we're making really good and impressive project there. We have a project called Project Magenta, which is around human creativity. You feed it lots of things like Bach sonatas, and the system will generate them. So it's not just about hearts, problems, or computer vision. It's also doing things like writing poetry or making music, and there's been incredible strides there. Some of the things that Project Magenta creates are, to my ear, untrained, indistinguishable from real composers. And what else is cool is this stuff is becoming increasingly available. This is sort of not locked up within the walls of the big tech companies, especially Google. We are making this available both with open source projects like TensorFlow, and we are constantly delighted and surprised at the kinds of things people are doing. Literally high school students armed with a laptop, TensorFlow, and YouTube can figure out how to do meaningful things, and we've been stunned and impressed. We're also building things like TPUs, tensor processing units, that are up in the cloud that allow deployments at scale. So it's not just about running it on your laptop. If you're crunching big data sets for genomics applications and things like that, we want to make that possible for third parties as well. And then providing packages that are preloaded models for a lot of the kinds of AI applications that people would want to build. And with that, I think I'm right on time, and we'll switch over to questions. Let's get a score. And I'll tell you how many minutes are left this time too. So we're at the top of the fourth quarter, 7 minutes left, Warriors up 92-90. Okay.
All right, that was, thanks so much, Bradley. That was great. Pleasure to be back. All right, so we have about 25 minutes for questions. We have one mic as of now, so we'll make this work. All right, over to you.
Right, my name is Rohan. Incredible opportunity to meet you, hear you speak. What was one of the most challenging projects on Google Photos for you?
I think the biggest challenge, like I mentioned some of the successful projects that I've run at Google, and there's been a slew of projects you've never heard of because they weren't successful or, uh-oh, cut out. Are we good? I'll just speak loud. What we had to do to move forward to a bright new future with Google Photos was deprecate Picasa. And Picasa was a product that had been up and running for 10 years. People had trusted, I know, they're working on it. They had trusted us and invested a lot of energy in that. And unfortunately, okay, good? And deprecating a product. Sometimes you have to deal with that in order to move forward. It's not like we stranded people and said, good luck with all your photos. You know, we give them ample notice. We give them opportunities not only to migrate into Google's next generation product, but to take their photos to Flickr or SmugMug or anywhere else they want to. You know, we really strongly believe in what we call takeout, which is products shouldn't be a roach motel that trap data. We always provide that opportunity for people to pick up, pack up, and take their data elsewhere. So we try to do this in as compassionate a way as possible. But, you know, and I think I alluded to this before, it wasn't like I was getting emails from Romania, what are you doing with Picasa? I was getting, you know, checked in the hallways from my peers at Google, like, what are you doing? Fortunately, that's not happening anymore. People are pleased with the success of Google Photos and pleased with the experience, but it's always hard to make a big bet like that and you know, stick your neck out.
I love Picasa and I still have the DMG file.
Cool. Yeah. Okay, yes, Robbie. Why don't you introduce yourself and what you do?
Sure. Robbie, I'm a senior product manager with Macy's.com. Excellent lecture. I had a question about video manipulation, or using AI to tell between real videos versus those that were manipulated. I had recently seen some video of politicians saying things that they might not have really said, just to showcase that you could do it. But I'm wondering about long term. Right now they look pretty rudimentary, but being able to use AI to be able to authenticate between what is real versus not real. And what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I think like a lot of abusive. Yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah, the mic. But the we're having audio problems. The question was, what about the use of AI to manipulate video? He's seen a video, and I hope all of you have seen this, where you can make Donald Trump say anything.
You don't need AI for that.
Yeah. He said you don't need AI for that. That's for sure. you know, how can we trust our eyes anymore when video itself, we always said, don't believe it till you see it. You know, now you can't even believe what you see because it's getting to the point where I can say, okay, Google, make me a video of, you know, Barack Obama congratulating, you know, Kevin Durant on the win, you know, and it'll just mint that, and it will look like he's saying it, and, you know, that's a new world we're moving toward. And I do think that it's an arms race. Part of what I was going to say is a lot of the techniques that we use for spam and abuse and sort of detecting things that are abusive, unfortunately, the bad actors also have access to technology, and it's constantly an arms race of sort of, you know, who can outdo each other. So there's no easy answers there, and this gets into the realm of ethics and sort of what we're going to have to do in society around issues of fake news, and you know, these are real issues, and I don't want to pretend that we have answers to them yet, and I don't even think we understand all the problems yet. For that, I watch Black Mirror, which I highly recommend. You know, we're getting better at sort of anticipating the problems, less good at coming up with the answers, but that is the first step.
So we'll take one from that side.
Okay, Mike is coming to you.
Yeah, great opportunity to learn more about your journey. You've had phenomenal success as an entrepreneur and as a product leader. So what's your one piece of advice to aspiring product leaders and entrepreneurs, especially in the AI domain?
Did people hear that? What's my one piece of advice for aspiring entrepreneurs? I think to be curious and to always put yourself into situations where you can grow and learn. Not to stagnate or aspire to be the smartest person in the room. I've always tried to challenge myself to go to places where I was the student, not the teacher. You know, to really go places where people around me can teach me, inspire me, and I've had no shortage of that at Google, at MIT, at Michigan, at my own company. Hire people smarter than you. I've done a great job of that. I think everyone I've hired has been smarter than me. And I think if you do that, you're constantly excited about that learning. As I mentioned, I was a poor student, but a good learner. And I really crave that aspect of the work. And you know, I mentioned, I think I put conclusion in quotes because we're nowhere near done. You know, it's an awesome milestone, and I'm super proud of Google Photos, but there's so much ahead of us and so much left to do. And so just keeping that spirit of continual improvement, you know, same as we do with every product, iterate and refine. Product manage your own ass, you know, basically get into a growth mindset, get into a data-driven, iterative mindset, and keep improving yourself and your craft. And I think if you do that, you maintain the passion that leads you to the right place, whatever version of success looks like for you. See one in front? Yeah.
Hi, my name is Rajni. I'm a product manager building smart connected kitchen equipment. So my question is, what advice would you have, or what does it mean to be a product manager who is new to AI products?
We're all new to AI products in some ways. I mean, there's not a long-standing practice. And in fact, even product management, I think, is a new craft. There's not many places you can go and come out with a badge that says I'm a certified product manager. And in fact, it means different things at different places. You know, Google's version of that is different than Microsoft's, is different than eBay's. So there's no right answer. I think being a product manager is really about focusing on the user. Part of it is knowing who is your user. You know, is it the digital SLR folks, or is it the people with cell phones? You know, identifying who the user is, and then really doing the work to meet the user where they're at. This was the tough lessons I had learned with Virage, as I was sort of doing the work that I found interesting, as opposed to listening and learning and meeting my customer. And it means literally going out there and meeting your customer. I mean, face-to-face interaction, user studies, over-the-shoulder ethnographic research. I mean, there's so many tools we have now to better understand who is the audience we are serving, what is the product that we are building. So I think, as I said, there's not 9 weird tricks to become a great product manager. It's some of the same old boring shit, whether you're building a insurance website or building the most cutting edge application to do AI. A lot of it is really around the craft. And a lot of that craft is really around taking pride in what you're building. I think one bit of advice I can give is it is much better to do one thing beautifully well than to do 90 things half-assed. And I think a lot of times our job as product managers is to thread that needle, to push back on all the other forces in our organization, sometimes our CEOs or our executives, or, and buck stops with you. You're the person who decides what's good enough. And I think too often we cave under the pressure. We get lazy and we sort of, ship stuff that we know isn't quite right or quite delightful or quite finished. And I know it's especially hard at a startup. It's easy for Google to sort of take our time and hone things to a high degree of polish, whereas if you're in an existential fight for your life, that's a luxury you may not have. But I do think it is the responsibility of product in each organization to do the best you can within that context to make sure the product you're shipping actually solves a problem for a user and does it in a way that is beautiful, delightful, and inspiring.
Questions over here?
Good talk. I really loved the part that you improvised in, the NBA Finals score. Saves us a few seconds of our pockets and just checking ourselves, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So.
Okay, let's do it again. It's getting toward the end of the game. It's getting exciting here. So. I heard 96-95 Warriors with 3 minutes left. Yeah.
Right down to the wire.
You guys know the 3 minutes takes about 20 minutes to play.
Yeah. So okay. So you talked about what you do beautifully well, right? So I guess we like hearing you talk about.
You're going to have to speak louder or get that mic working.
Yeah, so I'm wondering if you could elaborate a little bit about what you do beautifully well.
What I do beautifully well?
Yeah, since,
you saw that talk and you still have to ask.
You're a good talker. So are you a speech maker?
Pretty much. I think what I do well, to be not cheeky about it, and if you talk to people who've worked for me, I'm not being modest when I say I have hired people that are much smarter than me and much more capable than me. It's not just raw intelligence. People that have worked for me are people like Stuart Butterfield, who founded Slack, Chad Dickerson, CEO of Etsy, Pasha Sadri, who founded Polyvore. These are just like amazing entrepreneurs and leaders, and I'm good at empowering people. I think that at the level that I play, I can't take credit for building Google Photos. That wasn't my unique contribution or effort. I built the team that built Google Photos. Basically, I was able to curate the people that I had faith in, defend them against the other opinions in the organization, provide them air cover, be a shit umbrella, basically, as opposed to a shit funnel. That's a lot of what I see in my value add, is to sort of basically pick the right folks, empower them with the tools they need to do their job, and then run defense so that they can get their jobs done. And I think that's what I pride myself on, and that's sort of the main value I add. There are times when I'd like to think I have a good idea or contribute something in a meeting, but they might just be playing along with me. I'm not sure.
All right, there was somebody here who I ignored. Oh, here.
Okay. Okay, yes.
Thank you. My name is Pian Pian. Curious to learn about what are the visions for all the products that you have worked on so far. Second question is how how did the products you work on recognize emotions? Thank you.
Recognize emotions? Okay, so the answer to that is truly I don't know. I'm not being coy or humble. Like I haven't worked on Gmail for probably 5 years. I haven't worked on Google News for at least 2 years. In Google years, 2 weeks, everything changes, and so the product plans for the products which I have been associated with but no longer manage, I can't speak to them. I learn about them when you do, sitting in Google I/O, and my jaw's on the floor, and I'm super impressed. If you look at Google News, for instance, there's a huge amount of innovation there. Gmail, we have Smart Reply, which I use probably about 1/3 of the time, at least to start the email. But now there's sort of like, it'll compose the entirety of your, you just hit spacebar, and it will do all the work for you. That's amazing. And it's a little bit of a stunt. I mean, I don't actually anticipate that, have your bot email my bot and they'll sort of work it out. They're probably still talking, That's not the future, but that we can do that is sort of a stunning technical achievement and amazing. In terms of emotion, I actually think there's huge opportunity there. One of my colleagues from my generation at the Media Lab is Rosalind Picard, who is now a professor at the Media Lab. And she runs a group there called Effective Computing, which is really about emotional, first of all, understanding emotion, and then what do we change once we understand that I'm in a hurry, and I'm impatient, or I'm upset right now. How does that change? And I think if you look at a lot of the initiatives, we launched one at Google I/O, Apple launched one yesterday around digital wellness. That's sort of the term that we use. There's more and more thinking about phone addiction, and sort of bringing the emotional aspects of our relationship to technology back into the equation. So I think it's an excellent question. And there's a lot we can do in terms of, looking at you, watching how fast you type, watching, the aggression with which you type. I've seen all kinds of sort of unexpected ways to glean the user's state from data that they're contributing into the system, let alone things like galvanic skin response and heart rate and things like that. So there are ways to do that with sensors, but there's also ways to glean it from a passive approach as well. And I think it's a really important area of computing. Yes, Eduardo?
Yes. Curious about the simple signal to noise ratio. You indicated to ask the question over there that you used the umbrella to, how did you make the decision to go from the signal that said we should have an editing system to the signal that said we should have a photo management system?
So I use the term sort of pejorative shit umbrella. It wasn't shit. It was a bunch of well-meaning, well-intentioned people who had their own perspective on things, but didn't own the vision. I had been entrusted to own the vision, and so they didn't have the fullness of knowledge that I brought to the problem. So a lot of this is really about, not that was noise per se, it was just sort of incomplete, well-meaning knowledge coming in from left field. And we have a very open and transparent culture at Google where we encourage that. We actually want that. We depend on it. We call it dog fooding. We need that feedback to road test our product and convince ourselves that we're on the right track and have made the right decisions. So it's not sort of finger in the ears and sort of, so I was a little bit too coy when I sort of said that, But this is the job of a product manager, is really to decide what is signal, what is noise. A lot of it is sequencing. A lot of these things were not wrong. They were just not next. And so we have to figure out how do we ship a few things well and get the most important features out there, become indispensable, and then we'll add editing, and then we'll add the next step there. Building a foundation and having a plan to get there from here, is often the answer. So rarely do I hear bad ideas. The problem is that they're all pretty good ideas and we're drowning in them. And so triage and making sure you sequence them right. Have we won this thing yet? 20 seconds. 20 seconds?
40 seconds.
40 seconds? Oh, we're up by 6 though.
Oh.
Okay, we can.
All right, we'll take one more question and then we'll move into the shout out section. So where's Ginger? Yeah. You got a mic coming to you.
Hi. I love the idea of how we could have AI implemented into these hospitals for diagnostics and triage. But what kind of walls need to be overcome, or barriers crossed, where you have your Kaiser Permanentes, your Stanford Health Centers having full implementation of this AI? And where does IoT come into that as well, Internet of Things?
Totally. I think there's a few things. Like, if any of you have ever switched doctors or moved or changed jobs or lived, you understand it's almost impossible for doctors to trade medical records right now. They still use fax machines. It's unbelievable, how primitive that is. So it's sort of like the story I told is, we were way ahead of our time. We had built YouTube 7.0. The problem was the world hadn't built YouTube 1.0, So there are a lot of sort of just basic plumbing to make medicine modernized, and that's not necessarily glamorous, and it doesn't really take AI, but it takes, killing the fax machine and moving towards electronic records and things like that. So I think that's a huge part of the problem. Moving forward, you didn't mention this, and it may be implicit in your question, I think there are really important privacy and ethical issues around my own medical record, and those have to be thought of and overcome too. So I don't necessarily mind that in some ways this industry is moving slowly, because it sort of puts a little bit of drag on that, and so that we don't get ahead of ourselves with some of these things. For people with medical needs, I think things like helping look at mammograms and be able to triage those and get the most attention, they don't have the luxury of time. And so I think there are categories like that where we should bring the best technology we have to bear and empower these doctors and clinicians with the best diagnostic tools that they have. But in terms of what does medicine look like 20 years from now, we have a lot of work to do. But I think it's promising. I think that we are really moving very fast, and that it's changing at a rate that has never happened before. I don't think necessarily I will be the beneficiary. I think some of you will be the beneficiary, and certainly your children will be living in a completely new era of opportunity in terms of what we can do. So it's exciting times.
All right. Okay. Thanks so much, Bradley. Can we give Bradley a How many of you have been to a Products That Count event before? Okay, so you know what shout-outs are, and I invite you, anyone who is looking for people, who is looking for your next adventure, etc., just step up to the mic and take a few seconds to shout out whatever it is that you'd like to. So anyone who's done it before or wants to step up, come on up. Yes.
I'm Eduardo. We're Chrome Photos. We're looking for product managers, marketing managers, and then also we are using a lot of AI for photo editing. So if you're interested in that, let me know. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Hi again. My name is Ravi. I'm a senior product manager with Macy's.com. Been there for about 4 years, but I'm looking for something new, so I'll be looking for other opportunities as well.
Hi, my name is Eddie Garcia. I lead product for Sam's Club. We're a $50 billion business with 568 locations across the US. And we're looking for product managers in almost every discipline you could think of: search, supply chain, mobile, also looking for UX design talent as well. So come find me if you're interested. I used to work right here at eBay. What's up, eBay?
My name is Vicky. I work for a company called Clary, C-L-A-R-I. Our company does enterprise software for salespeople for them to better do opportunity inspection and forecasting management. We're looking for PMs and engineers in different departments, like backend, QA, and DevOps. We're also looking for UX designers. I myself is a UX designer, and I think we have a really good design team in enterprise software and marketing design. So if you're interested, please let me know. Thank you.
All right. So I think, oh, we got one more. Ginger.
Hello. Hey, I'm Hyman and I'm the CEO of a company called Neighbor. We are into video security, video surveillance. So I'm looking for salespeople and engineers who've got a background in image processing.
Well, thank you, Brad, for a very kind and generous talk. My name is Ajay, and I lead human-in-the-loop AI research globally for Fujitsu, a large Japanese IT giant. This is my first experience working in a really large company. We have about 160,000 people around the world. I serve as an inventor and as a leader, and one of the meetups I was looking for after coming to Products That Count is a place where we invent how to do change at scale inside companies, how to do growth at scale inside companies, not from a product perspective, but from the perspective of changing the company itself. Because in my role, I find myself, even as a builder of technology and inventions, actually working on changing mindsets often. So a couple of days ago, I started a meetup called Champions of Change. And if you go to meetup.com and search for Champions of Change, just put your search radius to be large enough, maybe 25 miles from where you are, you'll find it. It just got started. We have a lot of people there already. We'll plan talks like this with people who have experience building tools for internal change and growth, share personal practices, may have needs around it, connect with each other. So please look for Champions of Change and join us. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Rajni. I'm a product manager leading our smart kitchen and commercial equipment restrooms for companies like McDonald's, Wendy's, globally. So I have actually two announcements. First, I am looking, so if you guys are interested, please reach me out or I can connect with you guys as well. I'm also a board member of Advancing Women in Product, which is founded in 2017, and we're really growing really rapidly, and we are hiring volunteers, and if you want to learn more, I'm available here, so please connect. Thank you.
Great. So, okay, make it quick, please.
My name is Alex. I'm the CEO of Coding Ninjas. Coding Ninjas is a marketplace of embedded developers. We interview and test every developer before he gets to work on our platform. The majority of developers come from Eastern Europe. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. So Bradley will be here till 9 o'clock if you have any questions. So you know how this works. We usually have a session here on the first Wednesday of every month. As with product people, there are always exceptions, right? So next month is July 4th is the first Wednesday. So we don't expect any turnout there, so we're doing it on July 11th. So that's the only exception to our calendar. We have Tim Roberts, who was an early employee at Twitter. In fact, does anyone know what Twitter was before, or what it was called before it became Twitter?
Odeo.
Odeo, yeah. So he was actually an employee at Odeo, was an early employee at Twitter, was employee number 7 at Fitbit, and was there for about 7 years. So he'll be talking about how do you launch products and make sure that they're successful products, and not only launch them, but also scale them. So right here, July 11th, sign up on productsthatcount.com, and we look forward to seeing you here. This was our largest event, so thank you for all the promotion that you guys have been doing, and we look forward to having you here again. This was great. Thank you.